You are now watching part 2 of our cell transport notes, and we're going to finish up passive transport and then talk about active transport. So in passive transport, polar molecules will have difficulty crossing through this lipid bilayer of the membrane, and in order to do that, we have these things called our transport proteins that help the molecules pass through the membrane easily. These polar molecules will be able to directly pass through this protein without even coming in contact with that lipid bilayer. Okay. When we looked at our bubble example, when you did your stations, that was an example of a transport protein. Using transport proteins, still moving molecules from an area of high concentration to low concentration is considered passive transport. This process is known as what we call facilitated diffusion. Okay, facilitated diffusion is one of those definitions that you could have on page 29 of your notebook. So this process is called facilitated diffusion because the proteins are facilitating or helping the diffusion of those molecules across the cell membrane. It's, again, still considered to be passive transport, so not requiring energy, because the molecules, or the solute, is moving what we call down its concentration gradient from that area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. It just needs a bit of help. Facilitated diffusion will actually speed up the passage of a solute by providing this passage through the membrane, and it doesn't alter the direction of transport. Okay. Sometimes we have a protein that will pick something up on one side and turn around and drop it off on another side, or it could be a protein that's embedded in the membrane like we saw in the last slide. Now we're getting to active transport. Sometimes molecules need to move against their concentration gradient. This means that instead of going from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, we're moving from a low to a high concentration. This is called active transport because the cell actually needs to use energy in order to accomplish it. This is not the natural way of things, okay? Things naturally go from a high to low concentration. In active transport, things will go from a low to high concentration. You can see this happening in this photo with the squares. We've got 2 on this side, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. So we are going from our area of low concentration to high concentration. There's a protein being used here, and this yellow substance is actually energy. Okay, so anytime that we are doing passive transport, we do not need energy, whereas active transport requires energy to happen. One of the types of active transport is what we call a protein pump. So a protein pump is only used for small molecules, and this is when they need to move across the membrane from an area of low to high concentration. Protein pumps do require a lot of energy, and an example of a protein pump is a sodium-potassium pump. This is important in your nerve responses. So for example, if you set your hand on a hot stove and you immediately remove it, which you should, that is actually dealing with your sodium-potassium pump. You can see in this instance, potassium is coming into the cell and then sodium leaves. Both of these molecules are moving what we call against their concentration gradient, so low concentration to high concentration, so they do need energy using a protein pump. This was the example that you saw in the first video with Drake moving molecules across our membrane here. He's moving the potassium over into the cell, which are these pink molecules, and then he's taking the sodium molecules and taking them out of the cell, and ATP right here is our energy that's being used. So in this example, Drake is what we call a protein pump. He is using active transport to move molecules across our cell membrane. Another form of active transport is moving large molecules into the cell membrane. This is going to be called endocytosis. So endocytosis is the process of taking materials into the cell by means of infoldings or pockets of the cell membrane. So what the cell membrane does is it actually reaches out, it makes kind of like little arms. It reaches out, it grabs some food or whatever needs to come in, and it creates a vacuole within the cytoplasm here. Okay, so this is for large molecules only. This is mostly clumps of food. Okay, so large molecules and also clumps of food. And again, this is an example of active transport, which does require a lot of energy. Another example of active transport is going to be endocytosis. And endocytosis, again, is going to be those larger molecules. And you've got two types of endocytosis, phagocytosis and pinocytosis. Phagocytosis is going to be large food particles. Okay, again, that cell membrane is just going to reach out kind of and make little arms and bring it in a vacuole. And then you also have pinocytosis, which is called cellular drinking. This is going to be fluids. So the cell will surround large drops of fluids, and it does require lots of energy, so it is active transport. The other example of active transport is going to be exocytosis. Okay, so whereas endocytosis is coming into the cell, exocytosis, just like it sounds, is things exiting the cell. Exocytosis is the release of large molecules. Okay, so they cannot pass through the membrane, but they do need to leave. And what happens is the waste particles are in a vacuole. The vacuole will move towards the cell membrane and get closer until it eventually fuses its cell membrane with the vacuole and then releases all of the contents out of the cell. Okay, so this is an actual picture, and then here's a diagram. Again, exocytosis is large molecules leaving the cell. Make sure that you have what is on this slide on page 29 of your notebook, where it says active and passive transport. You can also put it below your chart, but it does need to be somewhere in your notebook. We're basically comparing active and passive transport. Passive transport, as a review, does not require energy. Okay, think about the word. If somebody is a passive person, they're kind of quiet, right? And they don't expel a lot of energy. They keep to themselves. So passive does not require energy. An example is like riding a bike down a hill. When you're on the bike, you don't have to pedal, but you're still moving. This is taking molecules going from a high concentration to a low concentration. So this is called going down the concentration gradient. Active transport does require energy. Okay. The example is like riding a bike up a hill. You need to get somewhere, but it does require energy to do. And for this, you are taking molecules and going from a low concentration to a high concentration, which means that you are going against its natural concentration gradient.